everyone. I'm Kanika Gera, and I'm traveling here from United States because Adobe wants to now suddenly, my organization, wants to develop and build a developer community and also, give more details and spread more kind of intelligence as well as more kind of awareness about its open source efforts. When you hear about Adobe, you always think about Adobe being generally a PDF company or a software designing company. That is what everybody thinks and we are perceived as. So a small group internally thought, there are so many people who go outside and contribute, and people like Adobe has a lot of tie-ups with Microsoft and other organizations like Marketo, and which we just acquired. And the first question that pops up is, after an acquisition, what is the involvement and engagement in open source community? And we do not have an answer. So here, we're just starting a first initial step on opening the doors to open source to Adobe and within Adobe, and I'm going to just give a brief on the challenges we have been running into, as well as the kind of process and the technical issues we actually faced implementing or even having our executives give a sign off on what Adobe's open source strategy would be. So we talk about what's open source. I mean, people just came and everybody had great talks about open source. How we believe open source is somebody contributing within the organization to many projects. And with this effort, we started open sourcing and contributing to Apache, a lot of Apache projects in Adobe, and opened up our repo. We never had a submission process, where an employee could just go in and give or make contributions to open projects within Adobe, but this has just started. And that is where we started accepting or calling ourselves open source organization or taking a step towards that. We have started organizing some open source events. It's still, all of them are just internal, but they've been US and now we are spreading up to India and Australia because we feel the need where, people have within the organization, the managers, the senior managers have been able to rope in talent through external contributions that do come in on the Adobe repository. We have a public Adobe repository which has many projects that are being now open sourced. So people say, we are open source, and I just pick up some Twitter links which organizations are actually open source. And if you see, many people, around 52, think Adobe is not an open source company, whereas Microsoft or consider Mozilla. And that's where we wanted to change and take these stats back to executives and show them how we are positioned within the organization, within the open source community. The first step here was we had to make grassroots efforts. A very small group of individuals started and who were really very passionate about open source and make kind of contributions to projects outside. They started with a very small setup, which was very informal, not funded by any VPs or SVPs, and they started just driving their passion around within the organization, where they faced a lot of challenges. And that is where they actually went down to the engineering teams to find out what were the challenges the engineering teams do, get into while they're developing softwares, because you sell Creative Cloud products, we sell so many other products which are all just not open source. And people want to build extensions on it or plugins on it. And we as an organization are not just making it easy at all. So going back to the developers, the feedback they got was they had to fight with the legal team, they had to fight with the marketing teams, the compliance team, the patent, the branding, and so on and so forth. And there was so much and developers do not want to go into all these formal processes because they're brainy people. They want to just write the code and get it out. It took us around I think, 17 or 18 months to get this process fixed and get the collaborative feedback from the developers across the organization, across countries within Adobe, and then make that as a feedback and take it ahead. The stumbling stones which we ran on was the processes were so long, they were so redundant, they seeked so much approval that all of the process steps were ignored, and developers were frustrated. Employees did not want to contribute, even if it's if it's a small spelling error or grammar mistake they want to go and fix it. They actually have to go through all the review processes, which was not making sense internally. To make this, I'm going to cover steps we take ahead to kind of acknowledge or address all these problems or challenges we faced. If you go to Adobe, I don't know if anybody ever visited the Adobe GitHub repository. We had I think 700 projects which did not even have a README contribution file, which did not have any contribution or code contribution made in it. And it was it was a bizarre, because when we go and position ourselves, or we tell ourselves, hey, we are partnering with Microsoft, we are acquiring Magento, but all of these people, they have a very, very strong network of the developers, and they make tremendous contribution to open source network. And these companies, when they get into Adobe, they get so scared, because none of these repositories have been ever watched or have been ever, no cleanup was ever done. And that group of people who actually started the small initiative started reaching out to the product teams and as well as the respective project leads to find out which repositories to keep, which to take out. We started to address these. We started with a starter repo. So what our starter repo was doing was actually giving anybody who wanted to contribute within the organization some kind of details on how to kickstart, how to avoid all the processes, how to actually get into the contribution list within Adobe without seeking approvals. Because earlier, to even contribute to an open source project within Adobe, we as employees had to actually take a permission or a contribution access from the manager, who may or may not be technical. We also did put a lot of efforts on remapping the whole submission process. I just have two forms which I'm displaying here. The old form or the old method had all the business review, the project information, the legal review, which was going in for every submission or every PR that was submitted in GitHub. And that was definitely frustrating everybody in the organization, especially the developers who really wanted to go. And it's not even about the developers only. Even if you see, there are so many documentations that is, it's so easy to just go and find a documentation on GitHub nowadays. People want to just, have external contributors come and see and try their stuff and give a feedback. And that is where we wanted to change the submission process and make it more simple. And we worked with a lot of product management teams. We worked with a lot of internal engineering managers to find out the flaws and how we could fix this. And we got off all the marketing stuff. We got off the legal team. We got the patent teams. And we got into the business reviews to make it a simple form for submission. Besides this, the approval and denial list was automated. So it needs now no approval. If it had a check, if you are submitting everything that is within within the scope of not the proprietary code of Adobe software, it's going to automatically go and approve it. And the other check which we implemented here on the approval list was if you have ever made more than 50 PR requests in a particular repository within Adobe, it's going to be automatically approved. And this really helped. I'll show you how. So this is a graph of the submitters which we have post the process, which was in around Feb to April 2018. And this was May to July, which kind of spiked up because it was easier for people to just go and get access and not run for getting approvals for a particular PR. And also, the automatic approvals were making, kind of spreading like fire, because people could now make contributions. And the reason it was spreading with fire was because we were starting initial efforts of also recognizing people internally across the globe who are making submissions to our open source projects. When we talked about getting started, I told you about the mess we had on our public repo. And here we started cleaning up our Adobe's existing repositories, and which was really a long process, because some of the projects which were in the repository did not even have the owner who were initially starting it or started it within Adobe. And external people had come and created, and these repositories were approved without having any proper sign-off. So it was a bizarre there. So we started with cleaning up all those repositories. Then we had the question from engineering managers. Engineering managers coming in, how are we going to get into the licenses agreement, the CLAs? And here's what we did. We went to all the product engineering teams, collected their feedback for how the common CLA should be, the contributor license agreement, and we then developed the same form which could be used either for the ICLIs or even for the external repositories which people wanted to make and put contributions to. And anybody can now access this CLAs. It's all public. The next step was when we had a new joiners getting into the team, or we had interns joining in, we wanted to promote. It's really difficult sometimes to work with people who've already been into the process, because they get into the process and it's kind of difficult to turn their chairs around and show them you followed the different thing. And how we wanted to start this was we started when a new joiner would come or join Adobe, they now get a contribution guideline or a handbook which enables them to make contributions, which enables them to go and write software and how to get it open sourced, which enables them or gives them even the authority to get their existing projects outsourced and open sourced within the organization, without getting into that loop, because you are a new engineer and you need to go to certain access or certain levels of permissions. That was all eradicated. We also have an open development template, because we are also pushing in efforts for open development within Adobe. And when I talk about open development, we're working on various projects. If you see, there's a project Helix in repo in Adobe. I don't know how many of you here know about the Adobe Experience Manager. We are actually building something serverless for Adobe Experience Manager on Project Helix, and it has all been open sourced already. So people can just go and make contribution within that repository and also see how the product is being built from the scratch. And it's open for everybody's feedback, so that is how we want to incorporate the open development approach too, so that we do not keep everything within Adobe, and rather offer all the extensibility and plugin building and everything else with having an external perspective too. Besides all of this, since all these efforts are just getting started within Adobe, we have started organizing some internal open source summits, which are soon going to be external, and we are soon going to have external developer letters going out to our developer community. And there would be a way to sign that up on adobe.io website, which is going to be our developer platform. As I told you, we started some open source awards. Again, it's in roadmap to go ahead and publish this or use this as a metrics for our external contributions too. When we do that as an external contribution, how we are working with our HR teams internally is when we receive various contributions from a particular person or the top 25 contributors externally, they would be able to get into a faster hiring process if they apply, if they've contributed to the Adobe repositories. We also have some communication channels and promotions internally. Again, all of this is going to get out soon in public, which is definitely our goal for FY19, starting January 2019. Now, the biggest challenge was to run all of this. We really needed a lot of budget because getting into the open source, you really need resources to work on it. You really need people to contribute, and you really need a lot of passionate people to go ahead and put their efforts to get into the groove and maybe go to the conferences. So what we did was we collected all the feedback. We worked with the product teams as well as the engineering teams and went to the executives. And the first answer was no, because people rely. It's very, very difficult for people to realize, especially at a level at CEO, because they don't really care, because it's not, the open source may not be driving the money, or it's not bringing the stock value up, right? Is it? Or that's the question that's asked in the room. And that is where we got into the facts, how open source impacts, or the presence in the community impacts the organization. And that is where we started, all the efforts now to spread awareness about open source with our executives, with our CEOs, and also to all the external organizations where Adobe is now going to be sponsoring and is sponsoring a lot of open source events. We also have a goal to be in the top 25 contributors within GitHub. We acquired Magento, and that really helped our ranking. But we still want to get up because the group that started this really believed that Adobe should be in top 5 at least to get into that open source community groove. And here's a ranking, which we just captured. This is a kind of feedback that goes around across the organization to let them know where we stand. And when we started all these efforts, we actually did a lot of improvement within our rank for Adobe to get it into the open source project teams. Now, the next challenge was, how do you align the open source with the business strategies? And again, that specific group of people who started this, Adobe is a platform organization, and that is how we bought our executives. When you're building a platform organization, or you're spreading information about a platform, we have content platform, we have data platform, we have experience platform now. We have so many platforms that are being built. We really want all those platforms to be open source. We want developers to give us feedback on how long it took them to get it provisioned, to get onboarded, or use our APIs. And that is how we aligned our open source strategy to our business strategy to get the executive buy-in. That's all from my side. If you have any questions around it, I'll be happy to answer.
Hi, this is Aman. So it seems like all of this effort actually started from developers within Adobe. And if that was the case, I am actually curious about how the conversation went on with the executives to convince them. And then, so we don't have we have a very limited policy in my company, and I'm wondering how my conversation would go and how all of that would work out. So I'm just interested in that conversation and how you convince them, basically.
So, I mean, how it started was the people who actually, it was a group of people who were developers and documentation writers, right, the technical doc writers. They actually prepared a deck and sent it to, so within Adobe, we have a very open culture and people can reach out. They actually sent it to the CTO directly, and the CTO, and then it just trickled down from the top down to bottom approach. And the best part of this was, while they were doing this, they also tried to showcase their efforts by making into presentations. There were so many people who went out and presented at various conferences. Unfortunately, all these efforts were just within US because that's where it started from. But people, we have a lot of engineering teams here in Bangalore office as well as Noida office, and everybody just got into the groove. And the reason I'm here today is because somebody in Bangalore office did reach out, and there was it was only by a telephone call that there's an open source India and why Adobe doesn't have a presence there, because Microsoft does, right? So, and that is, that is how it goes. So it was, I would not say people just went in, it's more about showing up your results and what you did or what you could achieve by showing this, particular parameters or key metrics which you had achieved, or how that could, get something for the organization or some benefit into the organization. And we were lucky that things went pretty, I was part of that group. And we were very, very lucky that, it trickled down, and, it was a very, very long process. It took us more than like 4 years now. We've been working on all of that. So, but eventually, I think it's paying off now.
And also, will you share some of the arguments that you presented to the executive?
Yes. So the biggest one was Adobe being the platform company. And, our acquisitions, the best part was, it was just a few months back when Adobe actually acquired Magento, which was the biggest win for us, because Magento drives the biggest developer community, if you see, and they have everything open sourced. So when we were merging in with Magento, the question and the developers from Magento were like, there's a whole community who comes and questions you, and then you can just, ask your bosses. This is what it is. Do we have an answer to that? No. Do we want to help them? Yes. How do we help them? And then there were the answers that went in. So that's basically it. Any other questions?
Peer pressure or satisfying developers' need? What is the real business case you would advise a company to?
So I think the real business case was, because we really did, it would surprise you, but we did see more. I think there were around 5 Adobe Brain team, who actually left because they were really very, very passionate about, open source, and it was not existing. And that kind of, killed a lot of, that trickles down, because, it's like a networking effect that follows up, and the people who were kind of, I would say worship, because, when you have a lot of somebody who's a brain and he's famous across the organization and he leaves because, people are not supporting him get his goal towards working on something which he really wants to put in his effort without taking any money from the organization on that, it's kind of, a very, very bad effect that went on. I would say yes, that would be the first thing. Then the second was merging all the acquisitions that were happening. And the third was this platform business use case, which we did talk to our CEO as well, directly. And the proposal was that the team, the open source Adobe team within internally, should either directly report to the CT or the CEO. And we're still working on that.